I'm 65 years old, and my name is Steven. After 40 years working in construction management in Portland, retirement should have been peaceful. My wife Margaret and I had plans for travel and spending time with our grandson, but life had other ideas. When Margaret passed away after her battle with cancer, our son Thomas made a choice that broke my heart. He chose his wife Allison's birthday celebration over his own mother's funeral. The pain was unbearable, but what happened next shocked me even more. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make a tough choice between family members. Trust me, what I did next changed everything. Margaret and I built a good life together, not extravagant but comfortable. Our modest 3-bedroom house in Northeast Portland had been our home for over 35 years. The neighborhood had changed around us, but our little corner with the big maple tree out front remained our constant. We met at Portland State in the late 70s. I was studying engineering and she was in education. Our first date was coffee at a little shop downtown that's long gone now. I knew she was special from the moment she started talking about her dreams of teaching elementary school kids. Her eyes lit up in a way that would continue to captivate me for the next 4 decades. Marriage came naturally for us, followed by our son Thomas 2 years later. We were young parents figuring things out as we went, but Margaret had a natural instinct for motherhood. She balanced her teaching career with family life beautifully, always making time for Thomas's baseball games and science projects. I worked hard in construction, eventually moving up to management, which meant long hours sometimes, but Margaret never complained. We were a team. Thomas was always a mama's boy growing up. Margaret nurtured his curious mind, reading to him every night and encouraging his interest in sports and science. He was a bright kid, got good grades without much effort, and was popular in school. Looking back now, there were signs of the selfishness that would later emerge. Small things like expecting Margaret to wash his uniform last minute before games, or the tantrums when he didn't get the newest video game his friends had. We chalked it up to normal kid behavior, but maybe we should have been stricter. College changed Thomas in ways we didn't expect. He went to University of Oregon on a partial academic scholarship, and that's where he met Allison. She was studying business, ambitious and driven. When Thomas first brought her home for Thanksgiving, his sophomore year, Margaret and I were impressed. She was polite, helped with dishes without being asked, and seemed genuinely interested in our family stories. But gradually, something shifted. Visits home became less frequent. When they did visit, Allison would make subtle comments about our house being quaint or our lifestyle being simple. There was an undercurrent of judgment that Margaret picked up on before I did. "She thinks she's too good for our family," Margaret confided in me one night after they left. I thought she was being sensitive, but time would prove her right. After graduation, Thomas and Allison moved to Seattle for her job at a marketing firm. Thomas found work as a science teacher at a private school. They got married in a lavish ceremony that Allison's parents mostly paid for. It was beautiful, but felt impersonal somehow. Margaret and I were introduced to Allison's friends and family as if we were distant relatives rather than the groom's parents. I took early retirement 5 years ago when Margaret was first diagnosed with breast cancer. The company offered a decent package, and I knew where I needed to be. Those first treatments seemed successful, and for a while we thought we had beaten it. Thomas and Allison visited twice during that initial diagnosis. Allison spent most of the time on her phone, and they stayed at a hotel downtown rather than in our guest room. When the cancer returned 3 years ago, it came back aggressively. Margaret faced it with the same grace and strength she approached everything in life, but this time the doctors were less optimistic. Thomas's visits became even more infrequent. There was always some reason he couldn't make it down from Seattle. An important meeting, a school event, Allison's family gathering. Each time I could see the hurt in Margaret's eyes, though she never complained. "He's building his own life," she would say, making excuses for him. "It's hard to get away." But I knew better. Seattle was only 3 hours away. We were talking about weekend visits, not moving in. During Margaret's final year, I noticed how Thomas would call less and text more. When we did video calls, Allison was often visible in the background, signaling to him to wrap it up. Once I overheard her say, "Tell them we have dinner reservations," when Margaret was in the middle of sharing news about her treatment. The last Christmas we had together, Thomas and Allison stayed for exactly 24 hours. They arrived late on Christmas Eve and left promptly after lunch on Christmas Day. Margaret had spent weeks planning the perfect holiday, decorating the house despite her weakness and preparing Thomas's favorite foods. 24 hours, that's all she got. As Margaret grew weaker in her final months, her one consistent wish was to have the family together one more time. "I just want to see my son," she would say in her increasingly frail voice. I called Thomas weekly, updating him on her condition and suggesting he visit soon. There was always a reason why the timing wasn't right. Little did I know that the worst betrayal was yet to come. The call from Dr. Anderson came on a Tuesday morning in April. Margaret had developed pneumonia, a common complication for cancer patients in her condition. Her already weakened system was struggling to fight it. "Mr. Peterson, I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should prepare yourself. Margaret's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight. If there's family who needs to say goodbye, now would be the time to call them." The doctor's words hit me like a physical blow. Even though we'd known this day was coming, nothing prepares you for the moment it arrives. With shaking hands, I immediately called Thomas. He picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear music and laughter in the background. "Dad, what's up?" I fought to keep my voice steady. "Thomas, it's Mom. The doctor says it's time. You need to come now, son. Today." There was a pause too long to be normal. I could hear the background noise fade like he'd walked into another room. "Today. Like right now. Today." I couldn't believe I was having to explain this. "Yes, Thomas, right now. Your mother doesn't have much time left. The pneumonia is winning. She's been asking for you." Another pause. I heard a woman's voice in the background, Allison, asking who was calling. "Dad, this is really bad timing." His voice dropped lower. "It's Allison's 30th birthday weekend. We've had this trip planned for months. We're at this resort in Napa with a bunch of her friends." The blood rushed to my head so fast I had to sit down. "Thomas, your mother is dying. Do you understand what I'm saying? The doctor thinks she has days, maybe hours." I know. But can't she hold on until Monday? We're supposed to be here until Sunday night. Everything's paid for, non-refundable. Allison's parents flew in from Chicago." I heard Allison's voice again, closer now, asking what was going on. Then Thomas, with his hand partially covering the phone. "It's my dad. Mom's taken a turn." Her response cut through clearly. "Tell him we'll visit next weekend. We're not canceling everything for another false alarm." Another false alarm, as if Margaret's suffering was an inconvenience to their schedule. "Thomas," I said, my voice breaking, "this is not a false alarm. This is it. This is goodbye. Your mother needs you here." "Dad, I can't just leave. Allison's been planning this for months. All her friends are here. Her family flew in. She'd never forgive me." "And you think your mother will forgive you for not being here? You think I will?" The line went silent for a moment. Then I heard Allison again, her voice unmistakable. "Tell him we'll send flowers. We can video call tomorrow." That's when I lost it. "Thomas, your mother has been there for every moment of your life. Every skinned knee, every school play, every graduation. She's fought this cancer for years, never complaining, always asking about you. And you can't give her this one thing, to be by her side when she needs you most. Dad, please understand." "No, Thomas, you understand. This is a choice you're making right now, a choice between your wife's birthday party and your mother's deathbed. Whatever you decide, we'll both have to live with it." The call was on speaker. Margaret was lying in her bed next to me, too weak to hold the phone, but alert enough to hear every word. I saw the tears sliding down her pale cheeks, and in that moment I hated my son for causing her this final pain. "I'll try to get a flight out tomorrow," Thomas said finally. "Maybe I can come for a day and then go back." "Don't bother." I snapped, anger overwhelming my better judgment. "Either come now or don't come at all." I hung up before he could respond. Margaret reached for my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "It's okay," she whispered, though we both knew it wasn't. "He has his own life now." Those were the last meaningful words she spoke to me. She fell asleep shortly after, her breathing labored and shallow. I sat beside her all night, holding her hand, telling her stories about our life together, reminding her of trips we'd taken, jokes we'd shared the day Thomas was born. Margaret Parker Peterson passed away at 6:17 the next morning. Thomas never called back. My wife of 40 years died without seeing her only son one last time. And for what? A birthday party in Napa Valley. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and decisions no grieving husband should have to make alone. What would Margaret want for her service? Which dress should she be buried in? Closed casket or open flowers or donations to cancer research? I was grateful for the friends and neighbors who stepped up. Margaret's fellow teachers brought food and helped me sort through paperwork. Our next-door neighbors of 20 years, the Wilsons, stayed late into the evenings, making sure I ate something and helping me write the obituary. Through it all, Thomas's absence was a physical ache. He sent text messages instead of calling, brief impersonal notes that read like they were composed by someone else, because they probably were. So sorry about Mom, thinking of you. Let me know when the funeral is scheduled. Checking flights for the weekend. Each one signed Thomas and Allison as if they were a single entity. I scheduled the funeral for Saturday, giving Thomas 4 days to make arrangements. I called and left a voicemail with all the details. He texted back, "Thanks for the info. We'll try our best to make it work." Try our best, as if attending his mother's funeral was on par with making a dinner reservation or catching a movie. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine at odds with the darkness I felt inside. Margaret would have appreciated the weather. "Even in sadness, look for the light," she used to say. The church where Margaret had taught Sunday school for years was filled to capacity. Her students, current and former, came with their parents, her fellow teachers, friends from the neighborhood, even the nurses from the oncology ward who had cared for her these past years. I kept glancing at the door, holding onto a shred of hope that Thomas would walk through it. I had saved him a seat in the front row right beside me. It remained conspicuously empty as the service began. Throughout the eulogy, which I somehow managed to deliver without completely breaking down, I kept thinking Thomas might still show up. Maybe his flight was delayed. Maybe there was traffic from the airport. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. I saw the looks of sympathy and confusion on the faces of friends who knew Thomas was missing. The whispered questions, "Where's their son? Couldn't he make it?" What could I say? My son chose a birthday party over his mother's funeral. The truth was too painful, too humiliating. So I made vague excuses about travel complications. After the service, during the reception at our home, I checked my phone obsessively. Nothing from Thomas, not even a text. But there was something worse. A mutual friend of Thomas and mine had forwarded me a post from social media. It was a photo of Thomas and Allison, glasses of wine raised sunsetting over what was clearly a vineyard in California. The caption read, "Perfect birthday weekend for my perfect wife. 30 never looked so good. Blessed @ Napa Valley # birthday girl." The timestamp was from that morning. While I was burying his mother, Thomas was drinking wine and taking selfies. I locked myself in the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. Then I sat on the cold tile floor and wept like I hadn't allowed myself to do since Margaret died. When all the well-wishers had gone home, leaving behind casseroles I would never eat and flowers that would wither and die. Like everything else, I sat alone in our living room. 40 years of memories surrounded me in photos and keepsakes. Margaret's reading glasses still sat on her nightstand. Her gardening hat hung by the back door. I poured myself a scotch, something I rarely did, and raised it in a toast to my wife. "I'm sorry, Maggie," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry he wasn't here. I'm sorry I couldn't make him understand what matters." That night I slept on the couch, unable to face our bed alone. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the first day of whatever life looked like without Margaret. I couldn't imagine it. Little did I know that tomorrow would bring Thomas to my doorstep with a request that would test the limits of my capacity for forgiveness. The morning after the funeral dawned clear and bright, another beautiful day that Margaret would never see. I found myself sitting in her garden. The spring flowers she'd planted last fall, before she became too weak, were now blooming in a riot of colors. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life continuing its relentless cycle while I sat frozen in grief. I was still in my bathrobe, coffee gone cold beside me, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Probably another neighbor with food or condolences. I didn't have the energy to put on a brave face, so I stayed where I was, hoping they'd leave whatever it was on the porch. The knock came anyway, insistent, 3 sharp raps. With a sigh, I pushed myself up from the garden bench and shuffled to the front door, not bothering to tighten my robe or smooth my hair. Whoever it was would have to accept me in full grieving widower mode. I opened the door and felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Thomas stood on my porch alone, wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt, sunglasses perched on top of his head. He looked tanned and rested, like he'd just returned from vacation, which of course he had. "Hey, Dad," he said, as if he'd just stopped by on a regular Sunday visit, as if he hadn't missed his mother's funeral the day before. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, emotions surging so strongly I thought I might collapse. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Can I come in?" Thomas asked after an awkward silence. Without a word, I stepped back, allowing him into the house. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, moving mechanically while my mind screamed. Thomas walked into the living room, glancing at the funeral flowers still arranged on tables and the mantel. "Looks like it was a nice service," he said, running a finger along a framed photo of Margaret. I found my voice then rough and raw. "Why are you here, Thomas?" He turned to face me, and I searched his features for any sign of grief, any indication that he was hurting too. His eyes were clear, his expression neutral. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." The audacity of that statement broke something in me. The dam I'd built to contain my anger cracked. "How I'm doing?" My voice was dangerously low. "I buried my wife yesterday, your mother, without you there." Thomas had the decency to look down at his shoes. "I know, Dad. The timing was just impossible with Allison's birthday trip. All her friends were there, her family flew in. We'd been planning it for months." "Your mother was dying for months, Thomas." The words came out like ice. "She asked for you every day." He moved to the couch and sat down without being invited. "Look, I feel bad about how everything worked out, but Mom would understand. She always did." That he would invoke Margaret's forgiving nature to excuse his behavior was almost more than I could bear. "Your mother understood a lot of things," I said, remaining standing. "She understood when you missed Christmas because Allison's family had a cabin in Aspen. She understood when you couldn't visit during her second round of chemo because you had concert tickets. She understood and made excuses for you because that's what mothers do. What she didn't understand was why her only son couldn't be bothered to say goodbye." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, that's not fair. I've been dealing with this in my own way." By posting wine-tasting photos while we were lowering her casket into the ground. His head snapped up. "You saw that. Everyone saw it, Thomas. Her friends, her colleagues. People asked me why my son was in Napa Valley instead of at his mother's funeral. What was I supposed to tell them?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Allison posted that. I told her maybe it wasn't the right time, but she said we shouldn't have to put our lives on hold." "Put your lives on hold?" I repeated incredulously. "This wasn't a dentist appointment, Thomas. It was your mother's funeral." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Margaret that it made my chest ache. "Look, Dad, what's done is done. I can't change it now. I came to talk about something else." Of course he did. Thomas hadn't come to apologize or grieve together. He wanted something. "What do you want, Thomas?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, suddenly businesslike. "So Allison and I have been looking at houses in Seattle. We found this great place in Queen Anne with a view of the Sound. Perfect location, good school district for when we start a family." I stared at him, unable to process this abrupt change in conversation. "The thing is," he continued, "Seattle real estate is crazy expensive. We've been saving, but with the down payment they're asking plus closing costs." He trailed off, looking at me expectantly. The realization of what he was asking hit me like a wave of cold water. "You came here the day after your mother's funeral, which you didn't attend, to ask me for money." Thomas had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know the timing isn't great, but the sellers need an answer by the end of the week. We're talking about my future here, Dad. Mom would want me to have a good place to raise her grandkids." Again, invoking Margaret to manipulate me. It was so transparent, so calculating that I almost laughed. "How much?" I asked flatly. $50,000, he replied without hesitation. "We'd pay you back, of course, eventually." $50,000, the sum Margaret and I had saved for retirement trips we'd never take now. The money that would help cover medical bills that kept arriving even after her death. "Allison really has her heart set on this place," Thomas continued, mistaking my silence for consideration. "And her parents already helped with our wedding, so we can't really ask them again." Something clicked into place. This was Allison's idea, wasn't it, coming here today? Thomas looked away. She thought it would be good to handle it in person rather than over the phone. "So considerate of her," I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "And where is Allison now?" "She's at the hotel. Thought it might be better if I talked to you alone first." At least she had that much awareness. The anger that had been simmering inside me began to boil over. "Do you have any idea what these past months have been like, Thomas?" Watching your mother waste away day by day, hearing her ask for you, making excuses for why you couldn't visit. And now you waltz in here not to mourn her or support me, but to ask for money. Thomas stood up defensive now. I knew you'd make this difficult. Allison said you would. It's always been about guilt trips with you and Mom. That was the breaking point. The accusation that Margaret and I had manipulated him when in reality we'd given him everything, including our unconditional love. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, come on. Don't be like this. It's just money. You don't need it all for yourself now that Mom's gone. Get out of my house, Thomas. Now. He grabbed his keys from the coffee table, face flushing red. Fine, I'll go. But think about it, okay? This is your future grandchildren we're talking about. As he reached the door, he turned back. Allison thinks you're punishing me for missing the funeral. Are you? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. No, Thomas, you're punishing yourself. You just don't know it yet. The door slammed behind him, and I was alone again with nothing but grief and the shocking realization that I had lost not just my wife, but my son as well. That night was the darkest of my life. Darker even than the night Margaret died, because then at least I had the comfort of knowing she was no longer in pain. Now I was faced with a new kind of pain, the knowledge that the son we had raised, loved, and sacrificed for had become someone we wouldn't recognize. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas standing in my living room asking for money like a stranger inquiring about a business transaction. No tears for his mother, no regret for missing her funeral, just a casual expectation that I would hand over our life savings for a house he and Allison wanted. Around 3 a.m, I found myself in Margaret's home office surrounded by her things. Her teaching awards on the wall, her carefully organized bookshelves, her desk calendar still open to the month she died appointments, and notes in her neat handwriting. In the bottom drawer of her desk was a leather journal I'd given her when she was first diagnosed. Write down your thoughts, I'd suggested. It might help. I'd never read it. It felt like an invasion of her privacy, but now, desperate for connection to her, I opened it. The first pages were what you might expect: fear about the diagnosis, gratitude for good days, frustration with treatment side effects. But as I continued reading, a theme emerged that broke my heart all over again. Her concern for Thomas. Stephen doesn't see it yet, but I'm worried about Thomas. Allison has such control over him. He canceled his visit again today, 3rd time this month. And later, called Thomas today. Allison answered his phone and said he was too busy to talk. When did I become someone my son is too busy for? The entries became more painful as her illness progressed. Thomas sent a text instead of calling on my birthday. I know it's silly to be hurt by that at my age, but I am. Stephen tries to hide it, but I know he's angry with Thomas for being so absent. I make excuses because I can't bear to think my son doesn't want to see me, but the truth is getting harder to ignore. The last entry, dated just 2 weeks before she died, gutted me. My greatest regret isn't dying. It's that I won't be here to help Thomas find his way back to being the son we raised. I'm afraid without me as a buffer, he and Stephen will drift further apart. My 2 beloved men, both stubborn, both hurt. My final prayer is that somehow they'll find their way back to each other, that Thomas will remember the values we taught him, that Stephen will have the strength to be the father Thomas needs, not just the father he wants. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Even in her final weeks, Margaret was thinking of us, worried about our relationship, and her fears had proven justified. Thomas and I weren't just drifting apart, we were actively in conflict. I spent the rest of the night thinking about Margaret's words. The father Thomas needs, not just the father he wants. What did that mean? The father he wanted was clearly an ATM, a source of easy money with no questions asked, but what did he need? By morning, exhausted but clear-headed, I called my old friend Jackson. We'd worked construction together for 20 years before he started his own company. Unlike me, Jackson had experience with tough love. His daughter had struggled with addiction in her 20s, and his refusal to enable her had eventually helped her find recovery. We met at a diner near his office. Jackson listened without interrupting as I poured out the whole story. Thomas missing the funeral. The request for money. Margaret's journal. When I finished, Jackson stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You know what this reminds me of? When Leah was using, she'd always have a crisis that only money could solve. Rent due, car broke down, lost her job, and her timing was impeccable, always asking when I was most vulnerable. Thomas isn't an addict, I protested. No, but he's addicted to Allison's approval, and she's addicted to control and status. From what you've told me, she's isolated him from family, manipulated him into putting her wants above everyone else's needs, and now she's using him to access your money. Put that way, the pattern was clear. So what do I do? Cut him off completely. Jackson shook his head. That's not what Margaret would want, and I don't think it's what you want either. But there's a difference between cutting him off and setting conditions. Boundaries aren't punishment, Steve. They're guidance. What kind of boundaries? If it were me, I'd make any financial help contingent on actions that demonstrate growth and reconnection with family values, the kind of values Margaret wrote about in her journal. I thought about it all the way home. Then I drove to the cemetery where we'd buried Margaret just 2 days earlier. The flowers from the funeral still looked fresh on her grave. I sat on the damp grass beside her headstone. I don't know what to do, Maggie, I said aloud. I'm angry with him, so angry, but he's still our son. A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, and I remembered something Margaret used to say when Thomas was going through his rebellious teenage years. Sometimes love means hard choices. Back at home, I called Barbara, our family attorney. We'd worked with her to update our wills when Margaret was diagnosed. She listened to my situation and my tentative plan. It's unusual, she admitted, but legal. You have the right to place conditions on inheritance or gifts. Just be very clear about the terms. We spent an hour drafting a document that would become my roadmap for what came next. Not cutting Thomas off, but not giving in either. A third path that I hoped would honor Margaret's final wishes. With the document in hand, I called Thomas. I've thought about your request, I said when he answered. I'd like to discuss it with you, in person, at the house. Great, he said, sounding relieved. I'll bring Allison. No, I said firmly. This is between you and me, father and son. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him conferring with Allison. Fine, he said finally. Tomorrow at 10, I agreed. Thomas arrived at 10:15, not bothering to apologize for the delay. I'd spent the morning steeling myself for what was to come, looking at old family photos and reminding myself that somewhere inside this entitled adult was the loving boy Margaret and I had raised. Thanks for reconsidering, Dad, he said as soon as he stepped through the door. But any hope that he'd had a change of heart faded when I saw Allison emerge from the passenger side of his car. I thought I said just you, I said when they both reached the porch. Allison gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thomas and I make financial decisions together. I'm sure you understand. I did understand. She wasn't about to let Thomas handle this alone, afraid he might be swayed by family ties or guilt. Fine, I said, stepping back to let them both in. They sat on the couch, Thomas in the middle, and Allison perched on the edge as if ready to intervene at any moment. I noticed she was dressed more formally than the occasion called for, in a blazer and slacks that might be appropriate for a business meeting, which I supposed was how she viewed this interaction. I sat across from them in Margaret's favorite chair, drawing strength from the feeling of being surrounded by her presence. Before we discuss money, I began. I'd like to talk about your mother, Thomas. Allison immediately shifted forward. Mr. Peterson, we're on a tight schedule today. The real estate market in Seattle moves quickly, and we need to know if you're able to help us with the down payment. I ignored her, keeping my eyes on Thomas. Your mother kept a journal during her illness. She wrote about how much she missed you, how she made excuses for your absences because she couldn't bear to think you were choosing to stay away. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Dad, is this really necessary? We know Mom was sick for a long time. It was hard for everyone. Especially for her, I said quietly, and for those of us who were actually here. Allison's posture stiffened. That's hardly fair. Thomas has his own life, his own responsibilities. Margaret would understand that. The casual use of my wife's name in Allison's mouth felt like a desecration. You don't get to speak for my wife, I said, my tone sharper than intended. You barely knew her. I knew her well enough, Allison countered, and I know she wouldn't want you using guilt to manipulate Thomas. Now about the down payment. I reached for the folder on the side table, removing the document Barbara and I had prepared. Yes, let's talk about money. I've given a lot of thought to your request, Thomas. His expression brightened clearly, assuming I was going to give in. I've decided I'm willing to provide financial assistance, I continued, but there will be conditions. Thomas and Allison exchanged glances. Conditions, he echoed. I handed him the document. I've established a trust. The money you're asking for, and eventually the rest of your inheritance when I'm gone, will be held in this trust. You can access it under specific circumstances. Thomas skimmed the first page, frowning. What kind of circumstances? First, you'll need to attend grief counseling. Not just 1 or 2 sessions, but a minimum of 6 months. Your mother's death is something you need to process properly, not push aside. Allison made a dismissive noise. Thomas is grieving in his own way. You can't dictate how someone mourns. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. Second, you and I will attend family counseling together once a week to work on rebuilding our relationship. Thomas looked up from the document, surprise evident on his face. You want to go to therapy with me? Yes, I said simply. Your mother's final wish was for us to find our way back to each other. I'm willing to do the work if you are. This is ridiculous, Allison interjected. You can't control an adult with money like this. Third, I pressed on, you'll need to complete 100 hours of volunteer service at the cancer center where your mother was treated. They have a program for family members of patients. Thomas set the document down. And if I don't agree to these terms, then no money changes hands. Not now, not when I'm gone. Everything will go to a foundation in your mother's name to support cancer research. Allison stood up abruptly. This is emotional blackmail. You're using money to force Thomas to live by your values. I met her gaze steadily. No, I'm using money to help him rediscover his own values, the ones his mother and I taught him before you came along. Her face flushed with anger. How dare you, Thomas, we're leaving. Your father clearly isn't interested in actually helping us. But Thomas didn't immediately stand. He was looking at the document again, reading more carefully now. It says here that once I complete these requirements, I not only get the $50,000, but eventually the house and all other assets. I nodded. Everything your mother and I worked for will be yours, Thomas, but only if you're the kind of man who deserves it, the kind of man she raised you to be. Allison grabbed Thomas's arm. This is insulting. He's treating you like a child who needs to earn an allowance. Are you really going to sit here and consider this? For the first time, I saw Thomas hesitate. A flicker of the sun I knew showing through as he looked around the house where he grew up. Maybe we should think about it, he said quietly. It's a lot of money in the long run. Allison's grip on his arm tightened. There's nothing to think about. We need the down payment now, not after you've spent months jumping through hoops for your father's approval. It's not about my approval, I clarified. It's about honoring your mother's memory and reconnecting with the values she instilled in you. Values like family loyalty. Thomas asked, a hint of his own anger surfacing. Isn't that what this is really about? Punishing me for choosing Allison's birthday over Mom's funeral? No, son. It's about helping you see that it was never a choice you should have had to make. A wife who truly loved you wouldn't have put you in that position. Allison's face contorted with rage. That's enough. I will not stand here and be blamed for Thomas's choices. He's a grown man who decided his priorities. If that hurts your feelings, that's your problem. She turned to Thomas. We're leaving. Now. Your father doesn't want to help us. He wants to control you. Thomas looked torn, glancing between Allison and me. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, decades of family bonds pulling against the more recent influence of his wife. Thomas, I said softly, this is a crossroads. You can continue down the path you're on, or you can take a step toward healing and reconnection. The choice is yours, but it's a real choice, not one someone else should make for you. Allison tugged at his arm again. If you stay here one more minute listening to this manipulation, I'm calling an Uber and going back to the hotel alone. The threat hung in the air. I held my breath, hoping that something of the sun Margaret and I raised remained, that he would stand his ground just this once. But Thomas stood, shoulders slumping slightly in defeat. I'm sorry, Dad. I can't do what you're asking. It's too much. It's not too much, I said, standing as well. It's exactly what you need, and deep down I think you know that. Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. We'll figure out the house situation without your help, maybe take out a larger mortgage. You're making a mistake, son. Allison was already heading for the door, victorious in her control. The only mistake was thinking you'd support your son's happiness without strings attached, she called over her shoulder. Thomas hesitated a moment longer. Goodbye, Dad. This door is always open to you, Thomas, I said as he turned to leave. With or without the money, you're still my son and I still love you. He paused, his back to me, and for a moment I thought he might turn around. But then Allison called his name sharply from outside, and whatever moment of connection we might have had vanished. I watched from the window as they drove away, Thomas staring straight ahead while Allison gestured animatedly beside him, no doubt reinforcing her perspective on what had just happened. The house felt emptier than ever as their car disappeared down the street. I picked up the document they'd left behind, wondering if I'd made the right choice or only driven my son further away. I'm trying, Maggie, I whispered to the empty room. I'm trying to be the father he needs. For the first week after Thomas and Allison left, I jumped every time the phone rang, hoping it might be him calling to reconsider. It never was. Friends checking in, the funeral home with a question about Margaret's memorial plaque, bill collectors who didn't care that my world had fallen apart. 2 weeks stretched into a month. I began the painful process of sorting through Margaret's things. Her clothes to a women's shelter, her books to the school where she'd taught, small keepsakes to friends who had loved her. Each item held memories, making the task both healing and excruciating. The blue dress she'd worn to our 30th anniversary dinner, the well-worn copy of Jane Eyre she read every year, the silly coffee mug I'd given her that said, "World's Best Teacher," that she used every morning despite the chip in the handle. I joined a grief support group at the community center. Listening to others talk about losing spouses helped me feel less alone, though no one else had the additional burden of a son who had chosen someone else's birthday over his mother's funeral. In the group I met people who became new friends. Eleanor, who had lost her husband of 50 years to a stroke. Reggie, whose wife had died of the same type of cancer as Margaret. Diana, a widow trying to raise teenage daughters alone. We sometimes went for coffee after meetings, sharing stories and occasional laughs, proving that life somehow continued even after unimaginable loss. I started volunteering at the cancer center myself, the same place I'd suggested Thomas volunteer. Something about being there helping families going through what we had endured made me feel closer to Margaret. I'd bring coffee to waiting family members, or simply sit and talk with patients during treatments, offering the companionship Margaret had always appreciated during her long hours in those same rooms. 2 months after our confrontation, I was leaving the center after my volunteer shift when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct made me press the green button. Hello? Dad? It's me. Thomas's voice sent a shock through my system. I had to sit down on a nearby bench. Thomas, are you okay? There was a pause, and I could hear traffic in the background. Yeah, mostly. Can we meet somewhere to talk? I gripped the phone tighter. Of course. When? Are you free tomorrow? There's that park Mom used to like with the rose garden. Could we meet there around noon? Margaret had loved Peninsula Park. We'd taken Thomas there as a child to feed the ducks and play on the swings. Later, she'd often walk there alone when she needed time to think. I'll be there, I promised. By the fountain. Yeah, thanks, Dad. He hung up before I could ask any of the questions swirling in my mind. Was he alone? Had something happened with Allison? Had he reconsidered my offer? I barely slept that night, alternating between hope that we might reconnect and fear that he was coming to cut ties permanently. The next day was unusually warm for Portland in June. I arrived at the park 30 minutes early, too anxious to sit at home waiting. I found a bench near the fountain with a good view of the park entrance and watched young families with children. Elderly couples walking hand in hand, joggers with dogs. Life continuing all around me while mine had been on pause. At exactly noon, I saw Thomas walking up the path, alone. He looked different somehow, tired perhaps, thinner than I remembered. He was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt I recognized as one Margaret had given him years ago for Christmas. He spotted me and raised a hand in greeting, then made his way to my bench and sat down beside me, leaving a careful space between us. Thanks for coming, he said, staring at the fountain rather than looking at me. Of course, I replied, fighting the urge to reach out and hug him. I'm glad you called. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the water spray and fall. Finally, Thomas spoke. Allison and I separated. Whatever I had been expecting, it wasn't that. I'm sorry. I said automatically, though I wasn't entirely sure if I meant it. Thomas gave a humorless laugh. You never liked her? I didn't dislike her. I disliked how she changed you. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that difference. Another silence fell between us, less awkward this time. What happened? I finally asked. Thomas took a deep breath. After we left your house that day, all Allison could talk about was how controlling you were, how unreasonable your conditions were. She said we should cut ties completely. He paused, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. But something kept bothering me, about Mom's funeral, about everything really. I couldn't sleep. Kept having these dreams where Mom was calling my name, but I couldn't reach her. My throat tightened at the image. I'd had similar dreams. Anyway, Thomas continued, I started looking at old photos one night when Allison was out with friends. Photos of me and Mom, me and you, all of us together, and it hit me what I'd done, not just missing the funeral, but all of it. The missed visits, the short phone calls, putting Allison's wants above Mom's needs above your needs. He looked at me directly for the first time. I screwed up, Dad, royally, monumentally screwed up, and I can never fix it. Mom's gone and she died thinking I didn't care enough to be there. Tears were streaming down his face now, the grief he'd been suppressing finally breaking through. She knew you loved her, I said softly, even at the end. Thomas wiped his face with the back of his hand. When I told Allison I wanted to apologize to you to try to make things right, she flipped out. Said I was choosing my guilt trip over our future. Said if I contacted you, it was over between us. That's when I realized you were right, about her control, about all of it. So I packed a bag and left. Been staying with a friend from work for the past 3 weeks. I absorbed this information slowly. I'm truly sorry your marriage is ending, Thomas. That's never easy. It's for the best, he said with a certainty that surprised me. It wasn't healthy. I see that now. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone Mom would have been ashamed of. The mention of Margaret brought fresh pain to both our faces. I miss her so much, Dad, Thomas whispered, and I can't believe I wasn't there when she needed me most. I put my hand on his shoulder, the first physical contact we'd had in months. Your mother's love was unconditional, Thomas. She forgave you long before you needed forgiveness. He broke down, then sobbing in a way I'd never seen him cry, not even as a child. I moved closer and put my arm around his shoulders, holding him as he released years of pent-up emotions. When his tears finally subsided, he straightened up and looked at me with red-rimmed but clearer eyes. I want to take you up on your offer, Dad. Not the money part. I don't care about that anymore. But the conditions, the grief counseling, the family therapy, the volunteering, I want to do all of it. Not to get the inheritance, but because I need to. For Mom, for you, for myself. It was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, what Margaret would have wanted. I'd like that, son. I know it doesn't fix anything, Thomas added. It doesn't bring Mom back or erase what I did, but maybe it's a start. It's a very good start, I assured him, feeling the first glimmer of hope I'd experienced since Margaret died. We sat together by the fountain for hours, talking more openly than we had in years. Thomas told me about the grief he'd been suppressing, the regret that had been eating at him. I shared stories about Margaret's final days, the beautiful moments among the painful ones, the grace with which she'd faced the end. We cried together and surprisingly laughed together at fond memories of the woman we'd both loved. And as the sun began to set over the park, casting long shadows across the grass, I felt Margaret's presence more strongly than I had since her death. Not in a supernatural way, but in the reconnection between father and son that had been her final wish. Would you like to come back to the house? I asked as we finally stood to leave. I've kept your room the same. Thomas hesitated. I'd like that, but not yet. I think I need to earn my way back, through actions, not just words. I nodded, understanding. The door is open whenever you're ready. We walked to the park entrance together, planning to meet the following week for our first family therapy session. As we prepared to go our separate ways, Thomas turned to me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in him since childhood. Do you think she knows, Mom, I mean? Do you think she knows I'm trying to make things right? I thought about Margaret's journal, her final prayer for us to find our way back to each other. Yes, I said with certainty. I think she knows. 6 months have passed since that day in the park. The journey hasn't been easy or straightforward. There have been difficult therapy sessions where old wounds were reopened before they could truly heal. Times when grief overwhelmed us both anew, moments of setback and frustration. But there has also been progress, real, tangible progress. Thomas completed his grief counseling, finding it so beneficial that he continues to go even after fulfilling the required sessions. Our family therapy helped us communicate in ways we never had before, breaking patterns that had damaged our relationship long before Allison entered the picture. At the cancer center where Margaret was treated, Thomas found purpose in helping families facing the same struggles we had endured. He particularly connected with teenage children of patients, understanding their conflicted emotions and fear in a way only someone who had been there could. His divorce from Allison was finalized last month. She fought it initially, then demanded a substantial settlement when she realized Thomas wouldn't change his mind. In the end, he gave her more than was required legally, saying he wanted a clean break with no lingering connections. Thomas found an apartment not far from my house, a small one-bedroom with a view of Mount Hood that reminds him of the view from his childhood bedroom window. He teaches science at a local high school, now having transferred from Seattle. "I want to be closer to home," he explained simply. "We have dinner together twice a week. Sometimes I cook, sometimes he does. Occasionally we order pizza and watch baseball games the way we used to when he was growing up. We're building new traditions while honoring the old ones Margaret created for our family." Today marks an important milestone. Thomas is moving the last of his things from storage into his new apartment, and afterward we're going to visit Margaret's grave together. It will be his first time seeing her headstone, a moment he feels ready for now. The cemetery is peaceful in the late afternoon light. Fall leaves drift across the manicured grass, and the air has that distinct October crispness that Margaret always loved. We stand side by side before her granite marker, which reads simply, "Margaret Parker. Peterson, beloved wife, mother and teacher. Love is the greatest legacy." Thomas kneels and places a bouquet of yellow roses, Margaret's favorite, against the stone. I watch as he traces the engraved letters of her name with his fingertips. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispers. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. But I'm here now." I place my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor of his suppressed tears. "She would be proud of you, Thomas. Not because you're perfect, but because you found the courage to change." He stands and turns to me, eyes wet but clear. "And of you, Dad, for not giving up on me when you had every right to." We embrace, then a real hug, the kind that heals. Over his shoulder, I look at Margaret's headstone and silently thank her for the wisdom in her final wishes, for knowing what we both needed better than we did ourselves. As we walk back to the car, Thomas says, "You know, you never did give me that money for the down payment." I glance at him, alarmed for a moment, but see he's smiling. "I've been thinking," he continues, "what if we used it to start a scholarship in Mom's name for kids who want to become teachers like she was?" The suggestion brings an unexpected lump to my throat. "She would love that." "Great," he says, his smile widening. "We can work on the details together." Together. Such a simple word, but one that holds the promise of healing, of new beginnings, born from painful endings of a father and son finding their way back to each other, just as Margaret had hoped. As we drive away from the cemetery, I feel a sense of peace that has eluded me since Margaret's diagnosis. The road ahead won't always be smooth. Grief has a way of resurging when least expected. But we're facing it together now, honoring Margaret's memory by rebuilding what was broken. And in that rebuilding, I've found that setting boundaries with love can sometimes be the greatest gift you can give someone who's lost their way. It's not about control or punishment, but about creating a path back to what matters most. Have you ever had to make a tough choice between enabling someone you love and helping them find a better path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of forgiveness and healing touched you in some way, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family loss and the difficult road to reconciliation. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and remember that it's never too late to begin the work of healing broken relationships. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.